terms of different forms of violence, and I think it's also really looking at development over time. So I think from sort of the starting to the hotspot system when it came into being, so sort of spring, summer 2015, and before that, actually, people were, I mean, there was some violence, but mostly people were able who arrived to sort of move through, right, both in Italy and in Greece. So that kind of institutionalized space where people were literally detained and held up didn't exist so much. And then you see this sort of starts happening around the fingerprinting. In first, it was like, well, there is no forced fingerprinting. Then they were quite ambiguous about it. And then it was quite clear that even Frontex will say, well, yeah, sometimes, we take people's fingers. But I mean, there's more than that. So that's one way. And of course, another way is really sort of people having them sort of really in conditions of indignity in these kind of hotspots as well. So in that regard, it's getting worse. I mean, for several reasons. Also, it's to do also sometimes with overcrowding, which has to do with the fact that people can't go, right? I mean, the hotspots are really there to have people there for a few days and then move on, but that's not happening. So more and more people are in really cramped spaces. So that's another problem there. What you see in the more informal spaces is that the kind of some of the institutional strains that you might have against physical violence are just not there. And I think especially also looking at France, if you see at the development over time, for instance in Calais, where up till about September, October, the police wouldn't really enter the camp. And then it started coming in, and it was more sort of kind of more intimidation. And then especially after the attacks in France, and also, of course, when you get to state of emergency, sort of, again, sort of some barriers are gone. And then you see this real physical violence, and what Marta was speaking about as well. You see the tear gassing, you see the rubber bullets, beatings. So really sort of quite physical, but also the kind of more mental violence of just the exhaustion of people, right? Deliberate exhaustion, deliberate pushing them back somewhere, detaining them for a few days, knowing it's illegal, then having to come back again. So it's also that sort of thing. And you see that elsewhere as well with evictions, right? Just pushing people out and sort of trying to exhaust them. So I think that's what you see a lot in the informal spaces. And in terms of what you say, about does it help if there are actually other people there, French people there, or other people there? I think to some extent it does, but at the same time, if you look at the jungle, that didn't really help at all. So I guess it depends as well. I think in France, I guess the situation is slightly different because there's a state of emergency, and that kind of just helps to do things. But I guess in other places that might be some restraint. But I think it also really depends on the country we're looking at in a particular local context. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in as well. Yeah.
Just to add on to that as well, so we measured the experiences of violence and we categorized them into violence by the police, which was verbal abuse, physical violence, and then tear gas as one specific form of physical violence. And we found high levels of all forms. This included beating with sticks, bones were broken on several occasions. We also had reported deaths resulting from police violence. The other category was the citizen violence, which could range from verbal abuse by ordinary citizens in the Calais city center, people spitting on the displaced people, shouting racist abuse at them. That was one sort of side of the spectrum, and then all the way to really violent and harmful physical abuse by fascist groups that would actually travel to Calais with the view of beating people up. So you had a whole range of really terrifying forms of violence. The presence of volunteers would not deter the far-right groups from going ahead. In fact, they often also attack volunteers for helping refugees in the camp. There had been many instances of slashed car tires, one car set on fire, but also physical violence that left people harmed. The other form of violence we found was that by trafficking mafia, which included many instances of sexual violence, sadly. So there's that. The fourth form was, of course, the fighting within the camp due to the dire conditions and the desperation. And that form of violence seemed to be less present during daytime when volunteers were in camp and when there was a sense of security. at night that could be exacerbated by post-traumatic stress and other forms of psychological hardship.
Yeah. Yeah, just one, I don't know if anyone else wants to come in here. No, just one point that I was just reminded of when Marta was speaking. I think what we also are seeing happening is actually the criminalization of humanitarian assistance, right? Whereby it actually also becomes a crime to assist people, which again, so in that regard, actually, it's seen as the people that help doesn't sort of actually help protect anyone, but they are seen as the criminals as well. So I guess that's sort of another angle where institutional violence plays a role as well. Right.
Hello. Thank you very much for this very interesting. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks very much for this very interesting description of Calais specifically, and then my question goes for the case of Calais in connection with what I had heard yesterday about the closing of the Balkan routes, and in connection with the changing role of the media in the coverage of the management of the crisis, humanitarian crisis. I wonder whether you have monitored in some way the changes that have happened in the coverage of the media in the case of Calais, and what kind of presence of international media did you have, and to what extent did this actually contribute to make known the reality of Calais, or to actually polarize, as you well said in your presentation, the public opinion about this? That would be my question.
Marta, do you want to speak about your BBC experience? I was just thinking about that. But if you want to sort of more generally comment on that, I can come back.
Thanks very much for that question. We haven't been able to do any sort of formal tracking of media or formal analysis thereof, although it would be incredibly interesting to measure and pull out statistics on keywords and such. Unfortunately, we have not done that. We believe we have seen, we saw around the eviction in March, we believe to have seen a certain change in the angle. This is my perception and the perception of my group, but may or may not be correct. We believe we saw more of empathy in the media coverage. We also had a lot of our statistics highlighting violence and dire living conditions picked up by media. We were surprised by this phenomenon. We weren't expecting to see that being picked up so easily, and to highlight the unmet humanitarian standards in a quantitative way. However, Dr. Leonie mentioned my BBC interview. So I was phoned up shortly after our research study, asked to come in for a live BBC News evening for 5 minutes to say a few words about our findings. I thought it was going to be a great opportunity to bring in a more nuanced image of the camp residents, to counteract some of the, biased TV coverage that even BBC is contributing to, in my humble opinion. I was quite pleased. The questions I was asked allowed me to talk about the educational qualifications, the professional backgrounds, and the rich potential of some of these camp residents that we'd come across. Only to find out afterwards, when I watched the show in repeat, that whilst I was doing so, whilst I was trying to give an evidence-based image of who's in the camp, footage was being played of young men covered in face masks, throwing Molotov cocktails at police. I have no idea where that footage came from. I had just returned 2 days before. It was a very peaceful situation. So it really undermined everything I was trying to say and get across. This is one example of the difficulties we find as we try to bring in a more nuanced and a broader picture of what's going on. But we're hopeful that we can all work together to influence this as well somehow. So, yeah.
No, just to sort of to add to that, I think when the the findings of your project came out, there was definitely some sort of, actually a lot of attention, which was great, and a sort of more positive attention as well. But yes, I think it does go, you can see what's being said about the camp and how in relation to sort of British politics and public opinion more generally, I think. I think there was a real also shift when, of course, the pictures of Aylan, you know, came up and so on, and you could see that also in British media more generally, from this really negative image to, oh, actually, some people are refugees, we need to protect them. Not the other ones, of course, but so there was a bit of a change there, but I think sort of that's kind of long forgotten. And then once the referendum debate started, it was, and then again, at such a point, Calais just becomes another excuse to, you know, speak about all the migrants coming in at a doorstep and so on, and the threats of France that they will suspend the Turkey agreement, and that, you know, then, I mean, weirdly, that the Calais camp will be moved to Dover. Well, of course, there won't be a camp, because once people are in the UK, they'll apply for asylum. So, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But so you could really see that, I think, that sort of, that playing up, and again now as well. Actually, one of the things I'm going back to Calais on Tuesday. I actually want to see the other way. What are people's the people living in the jungle? What are their perceptions of what's happened before and after Brexit, and sort of that whole debate? So I'd be quite interested actually to hear what their perception is on that.